Hello, and welcome to the Tabletop Team Podcast. I'm your host, Joe, and this is a podcast where we'll be talking about a lot of tabletop RPGs, specifically leaning towards Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, but there's a lot of them out there, and I would love to play more, but it's kind of hard to find a group. I'm sure many of you can relate to that. With me today, I have a guest, which will be the normal setting for this type of podcast. It'll be me with a guest where either I'll interview or we'll just discuss topics and questions. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Jason. I go by So and Jay, and I have previous experience podcasting with Joe as well on the old That Cast, and I've been playing tabletop RPGs for quite a long time now. So he thought it would be a good idea for me to be one of the guests on his new podcast. So I'm pretty happy to be here, man.
Thank you. So yeah, I really love podcasting, and I've been doing D&D for a long time, and needed to find some way to do both. So here we are doing a D&D podcast. Hopefully everyone loves it. So that's the base of the podcast. There's not even like music. I don't really have much planned for it. I'm just kind of throwing it out there and seeing what lands. So that's the gist of it, and hope you enjoy. So we're gonna just jump right into introductions for ourselves around RPGs and D&D and such like that. So I'll start with my guest. When did you first hear about D&D or tabletop RPGs?
I thought long and hard about this question because spoilers, you did give me the questions ahead of time. I had advance notice on this. So I thought about this. And I think the first time that I actually cared about D&D is separate from the first time that I actually heard about it. First time I actually cared about it is probably when you first invited me to play, 8 years ago or 7 years ago or whenever. The first time that I heard about D&D was in junior year of high school, which I believe was the year that we started to become friends, and we really became friends my senior year once you had graduated. But we were acquaintances before that. In when was that? 2010?
Yeah, something crazy like that.
Oh, maybe that was my sophomore year.
Yeah, we were good old gym buddies.
I definitely had heard of D&D because I was in our high school's computer club, which was essentially nerd club, and I know that people there played other tabletop things. I believe Pathfinder is one.
Correct. That's when 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons came out. A lot of people really didn't like it because it was so obscure and different from what D&D was that
Right.
a group of fans essentially created Pathfinder to be more like what D&D was. But not going too much into it, it is definitely a game where it's DMs versus the players instead of like a collective game. At least
Right.
that's what I've been told. For example,
It,
I just have to tell you this example of one of the rules. So normally in D&D there's a thing called a crit. Right? I'm talking as if you don't know anything about tabletops to the general audience. I don't know why you'd be listening to this if that was the case. But anyways, if you roll a d20 and get a 20, usually that means you crit. You auto hit and you can do double damage. In Pathfinder, they have a thing called confirmed crit, where not only do you roll the d20, you have to roll again to see if you actually hit like the armor class of something before it counts.
okay.
It's something weird like that. It's just one of the rules that's always stood out to me. But I'm sorry to cut you off. I just wanted to bring that up on what Pathfinder is in my head.
Yeah. Well, again, I don't know anything about Pathfinder other than it by name because I remember kids playing it after school in Mr. Moselle's room. So they were over in the corner and they would be playing Pathfinder, and I realized it was some sort of tabletop RPG. I noticed it had a lot of cards. I don't know if those were like specific like spell cards or whatever. I really didn't pay attention to it, but that was the first time that I had heard of tabletop RPGs. But the first time that I actually cared about tabletop RPGs was, a year or two later when you had invited me to go and actually play one.
Yeah, our first real game, I consider.
Yeah.
So I first heard about D&D through a good old podcast I used to binge listen to all the time, known as the Yog Pod.
Of course.
There's several episodes like right in the earliness of it, and then they did one later on where they played D&D, and I was just like, what is this game that they're playing? Like, they just kept talking about it, and I started researching and delving into it, and I ended up buying like the starter set, and that's really what got me into it. And honestly, a lot of times, before we started our main campaign we're doing now, a lot of times what would make me go like, guys, we really need to play uh something like a new mini game or whatever that we did all the time, was whenever there was the Yogg's Quest videos. Those always inspired me to want to do more.
Those are really good videos, and it sucks you in. That's the whole point of tabletop RPGs and RPGs in general, is to remove yourself from yourself and become a character and make everything live together. And with the combined imaginations of not only the dungeon master, who is the storyteller, but with all of the players and their different ideas coming together to it sounds a little bit stupid when I say this, but it's like you're all 4 years old again and you're just playing pretend,
Oh,
but with a bunch of like like crazy and critical rules and a bunch of combat and everything. Except you're not only four, you're not limited to the mind of a 4-year-old. You have more reasoning in your life, and you're able to make your character come to life in this world that you're all collectively imagining, and it's really fun.
100%. I have nothing against what you just said.
We're just a bunch of large toddlers. That's what it boils down to.
And usually the jokes that end up spawning in a D&D game definitely confirm that.
Of course.
Before we start going into more details about our lives, let's just kind of keep it general. What's the one thing you really like about D&D, and what's one thing you don't really like about it?
What I really like, there's two distinct things that I really like that kind of coincide with each other. One is thinking outside the box when you are, as a player anyways, because I think I've only DM'd one time, but as a player, if you're confronted with a problem, there might seem to be a logical solution, and I'm usually a logical type of person, and I usually try to just resolve the issue in the logical manner. But at the same time, you're not always the one that gets to initiate the solution. Maybe someone else in your party has an idea and they say that before you have the chance to mention what your idea is. And that kind of ties into the second thing. I really like how sometimes you just get the completely honest, blunt answers that don't take any thought and are very unplanned, but they lead to hilarious situations. And to give a brief, quick example of recent, it was just last night that we all convened together and had another session of D&D, and it was the first time that we had been all together, and I felt a bigger energy, and I felt like people were more invested because we were actually meeting in person. We haven't met in person for about 3 months because of the whole COVID-19 issue, but we met outside in the garage, and we were confronted with the beginnings of a combat scenario. And during the combat scenario, one of our characters literally just picked up a potato and hucked it at a guy. And it's like, what does this have to do? This makes no sense. You're a bard. You could do a billion other things. But it was such like the honest answer, because this character that had been playing was really infatuated with these potatoes that were growing here and just picked it up and chucked it at a guy, and it ended up making the bad guy lose a turn because it stunned him so much. And it's like I really enjoy how these illogical, unplanned, but just honest, genuine responses of what you would do in character lead to such hilarious situations like that.
Yeah, I fully agree. I'm typically the dungeon master. I rarely play. It's one of those few things I will brag about. I am a very creative individual, and people tell me that all the time, so I
I
don't
can
mind.
confirm.
I do not mind flaunting that around. I love seeing what people do, the responses they make, and, it's just incredible some of the things people come up with. I didn't think, to go back to that same scenario, because I'm running that game, I didn't think that character was going to throw that potato. And I had to think, if it hits, what does it do? What is this potato like? And I don't really want to get too much into details because then we have to go through the whole
And that's
issue.
why I
Yeah,
left it
but
quite vague.
yeah, it gets very detailed. They were magic potatoes. We'll say that. We can say they were magic potatoes, so there's a reason why it did what it did. But I had to think about that. And kind of building off the same thing of last night as how people play is when people play honestly is what I love, because we had one player who is not the brightest. His character is not the brightest, and we love him to death. But he
You slipped in
overthinks.
his character, didn't you?
What?
I said you slipped in his character, didn't you?
Yeah,
Oh, we love him.
we do. But he played so well last night because he was under the influence of vampires, and there wasn't even part. There were part where it's like, are you actually just being dumb, or are you under the influence? And he's like, a bit of both. And he just played so well.
And this again is one of those just genuine, honest responses that didn't require too much thought that I really enjoyed because knowing his character and how his character plays and just how immediately he answered, it was just like, yeah, I'm here for diplomacy. Like we got a secret note to show up at a back door to a vampire mansion. And once we break in the back secret door, he just lets himself be known. He's just like, "Hey, I got this note, this anonymous tip off that I was supposed to come here. I assumed it was from the leader of the vampires," and he's completely genuine with it.
Yeah,
Like I don't know what we would have done otherwise, but I absolutely love. That's one of those things that I love. Just the genuine, honest responses that nobody could possibly plan for because everybody's so different. They all have a different perception of the story.
yeah, it was amazing. But in turn, that kind of brings me around to what I like least about the game, and that's honestly something I've discovered about myself. And that's how like mad I get at people who don't take it seriously like I do. Because it is a commitment when you're playing a tabletop RPG like Dungeons and Dragons. It's like we are spending 3, 4, sometimes 5 hours a week playing this game, and I'm spending my own time like coming up with stories and magic items and all this stuff for you guys. We recently got to the midway point of our campaign. Everyone is level 10, and if you don't know, in 5th edition, I think it's almost in all editions of Dungeons and Dragons, you go up, the max level is 20. And
Oh, we're level 11, sir.
we're level 11. Well, no, I'm saying at level 10 was the midway point,
Oh,
and
okay.
3 of our 5 players decided to change characters completely. And they're all very new at this. Like they were having trouble learning their own characters still. And I was like, whatever, it'll be fun. It's what you guys want to do. But when the full spell casting character showed up with no spells prepared, after I asked multiple times if I could help you, and they said, no, I got it, I was very upset. And part of me is like, it's just a game, and I shouldn't be this upset at this person. But another part of me is like, but we've all made the commitment to it, so I don't know like where to feel, and I don't really like that about myself, about being a jerk, basically.
I mean, it's got foundations, but yeah, you do have to remember this is a casual game for a lot of people. They're not everybody is as extremely hardcore into it like you or the DM in my other game who caught D&D fever about a year ago. I'll get into her a little bit later. A lot of people do treat D&D as quite a casual game where you don't have to do much in between sessions. And I don't think sometimes people realize how much effort that the DM puts in between sessions because without them,
There
there's
is
no
no
story.
session. Yeah.
There's no session, there's no story.
Did you mention what you don't like about the game, or?
I have not yet, but it kind of piggybacks a little bit off of that. And the note that I had written down was that I don't like when players aren't as committed as you would like them to be. And again, this is a situation where I understand that not everybody can live and breathe D&D for the entire week. But it would be nice if, like, halfway through the week you sat down and thought, okay, I'm going to be playing D&D in on this weekend, 3 days from now. I'm going to just mentally go over and refresh myself cuz a week is a long time. It's a common occurrence that people will meet every week or every 2 weeks, but that's a long time to forget what's going on in this alternate fantasy realm that you've all created together. So I find it nice to find a time, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or something like that, and just look over my D&D notes. That's another thing. Take notes, for God's sake. They don't have to be super detailed, but like, take notes. Because then when you go back, thankfully, playing with you as DM and playing with my other DM, you guys do a quick recap of what happened last session, and that kind of helps everybody get back into the mindset of D&D. But it's a lot easier if you just don't lose that mindset over 7 whole days of not remembering what's going on because you've got a real life to attend to.
Yeah, because on top of that, our group, as much as we'd like to meet up weekly, we don't always. Between last session and the session before was a 2 week gap.
Exactly. I mean, and that happens. Stuff happens. And next week might be another 2 week gap depending on everybody's situation. And that's just life. You gotta roll with the punches on that one. But it is nice to just keep up to date and make sure your mind's still sharp on what's going on in the story. I will be completely honest, because of this last 2 week gap, I almost forgot where we were in the story until the recap, and I'm like, oh yeah, everything is flooding back to me now.
Yeah, and as a dungeon master, from my perspective, I don't mind if you don't take super notes. But if we're into the third session and I need to retell you what the world name is, or the main bad guys again, then I get a little upset. But I think that's also like a fair thing to be upset about. Like, it's something we've said several times, and if you can't remember, just write it down on a scrap piece of paper. But that's just me. Well, let's get more into specifics. Let's actually swap stories, and hopefully they're enjoyable for everybody to listen. You and I have a very similar first game to go over. If you don't mind, I'd like to take the lead because I actually had another quote-unquote first game that I did before ours.
Oh
And
yeah, 100%.
yeah, and I'd
Go
like to
for it.
share that before, because you and I can kind of just jump back and forth between our story because it's a very similar one.
On my first game, you were not the DM, you were also a player. So we both have
Correct.
experiences with that. And it was still a very early game for you, from what I'm gathering. But yeah, go ahead and share your first game.
So I got the Dungeons and Dragons starter set. I believe it was fourth edition, but I don't remember. A lot of things I based my games off of before I got into fifth edition was off of the 3.5 system where you're adding, pluses and minuses to all your different rolls and such. So I don't really remember how much of the rules were there. But I got the book, I read through it, I made a character, and I had my two buds at the time, and I helped them make characters. And essentially, I really wanted to play, but I also knew somebody had to run it, so I was both a DM and a player character. And I was playing a character. Oh god, I can't even remember his name. Wow,
I
it's
mean,
been
it
so
had to be
long.
confusing.
It was. I remember he was the Knight of Or, which I spelled ORX. And the idea was he was this human knight whose entire city he was protected with guard to guard was destroyed by a dragon, and he had to get these magical pieces of ore, like basically concentrated magic stuff, and he would bring it to his dwarf buddy to make super armor and weapons out of it for him.
Right.
And that was like his story. Never got anywhere with that. So we had I had my two friends and me, and we were trying to play through this whole thing. And I was like, look, guys, I know I have the rules in front of me. I know like all the stuff, so my character will be here for combat and to like kind of talk to you guys, but he's not gonna like solve puzzles for you. And they're like, okay, cool, cool. And in the first room of this starter dungeon, there is a pool, and on a successful, I believe it's an Arcana check of like you had to hit like a 20 something high. You could use it to like look into other rooms, basically. Like it was like a security camera, but in magic stance. And my one friend's like, I want to know what this does, and he rolls and he gets nothing. He doesn't get enough. And the other guy's like, I'm gonna roll, and doesn't get enough. And they're like, well, we're not leaving until we know what this pool does. Can we roll again? And I was like, this is my first time. Normally in D&D, you have to say, no, you don't know, move on. But they're just like, they refuse to move on. And it was kind of like a very sour note in my memory, to the point where I had to, I believe they rolled like 5 times each, not passing and still insisting on staying until they knew what it was. Where I had to like make up, like, there's a note written in Goblin that says, oh, security camera feed or something stupid like that, just to get them to move on.
Amazing.
And that was like such a solid memory of mine from my very first game.
And despite all that, you've still persisted on.
Oh yeah. That was like my very first game technically, but really what I consider my first game that I really enjoyed was the one that Jason and I were both in with our friend Jeff. I believe Steven was there, but rarely. My sister, and it was run by our friend Ian. Do you want to take this, or?
I mean, I can take the very beginning of it, because honestly, I don't remember a whole lot of specifics about this campaign story-wise. I literally just remember the beginning because that's the meme.
Yeah.
So, you know,
I'll explain the story and then you can go into the detail. The idea was Ian created like this, somehow came up with this whole world on the spot, and by somehow I do it all the time now, so. And our characters were a bunch of adventurers on a boat that crashed, and we had to like just go through all these weird, wacky adventures for different reasons. I was playing one of my fallback characters to almost every, whether it be online or a video game RPG or a tabletop one, is Salem Werbenbacher, a guy who was bitten by a zombie but like blessed by a priest at the same time, so he's half undead. He's like still got his soul, and he's a necromancer.
He's an interesting character.
Yes, he is. And my sister played a character who was, I remember it so clearly. She played a character who was once possessed by a demon, got thrown out of her house from her family, got rid of the demon, but she kept like some of the features it gave her, like the horns and like the black eyes, and they wouldn't let her back into her home, so she had to go adventuring to survive. And Jeff played Dwar, a dwarf who slept with a witch who took his memories afterwards. So the only thing he cared about was his heavy armor.
And his personal quest was to eventually find this red-haired witch later to try to get his memories back. I don't know if we ever dealt with that. I do remember that.
I don't remember Steven's character at all, but
he was he was a halfling, and he was some sort of spellcaster. I know that much, but I don't remember much about him. I think he was a gnome.
He was so rarely like part of our game though, too. Like I think we did like a couple sessions of that game, and he showed up to like, I think we did like 3 or 4, and he only showed up to like 1 or 2 of them.
Yeah, regardless. And then there's my character, who was based off of, at the time, the only really fantasy RPG type character that I had, which was my first Skyrim character. This must have been 2013 or so, because I didn't get, maybe I based the Skyrim character off of this character. I don't know. It was so long ago.
Yeah.
The point is, I didn't have a PC to play like PC video games until like late 2012, early 2013 anyways. So by then Skyrim had been out for a while. So I think I probably based the Skyrim character after this one. I was an elf. I was a ranger named Edmus Tallpine, and I was notorious for being a bit of a coward. And the whole reason that our adventure began in the first place was because I was attempting to show off a new one of my attacks that I called the shot bow. If if you know anything about me, I definitely enjoy shotguns in video games because I much prefer just to shoot all the bullets at once rather than one bullet rapidly after another. So, graciously, I was allowed the ability to like grab 3 or 4 or 5 arrows and shoot them all at the same time in a big cone. I don't know if I got that ability until a little bit later, but I was attempting it, and then I shot a hole in the boat, and the boat sank, and then our adventure began. And
I should mention this was not like an actual edition of D&D. What
oh no,
I kind of came up with the system on the spot. What it was is we picked stats, and I was like, you have like a +3, a +2, a +1, a 0, a -1, and a -2, and you had to put it where you wanted for your character. And then I gave us all different abilities you could use like once per game or something like that.
yeah, it was quite homebrew. But the really, honestly, the only thing I remember about that game is the very first thing, because we got off. Well, I say we got off the boat. The boat
We
sank,
woke
and
up on the shore.
we washed ashore, and we woke everybody up, and we were like, all right, well, what do we do? And then suddenly some crazy old man jumps out from the forest, and assuming like he's some sort of druid or something, that he's going to give us a quest or whatever. But before that even happens, considering I had no idea anything about the rules of D&D or whatever, I jokingly said, "Oh, I'm going to shoot him." And then everybody was like, "What?" And I'm like, "No, I was joking." And they're like, "No, you said it. You have to go through with it. You said it, so therefore you have to go through with it." So I'm
that
like,
that
"Oh,
I,
all
I
right."
just want to stop you from. That's a very common rule when you're starting D. Like we don't do that now, but
Yeah.
when you're new to D&D, it's kind of a way to you kind of enforce something like that. Like what if you say jokingly, "Oh, let's kill him," you have the character actually hear that, or you say, "I shoot him," and you actually do it, just so people understand like how the
Your
game
actions have consequences.
exactly. So, but you can continue with.
So they made me roll for it, and my first roll in D&D was a nat 20, and I critted the poor old man, and I killed him.
We
In one
spent the
hit.
next 20 minutes trying to revive this poor old man because Ian had no idea how to give us his quest.
So the next thing that he decided to do, first of all, I went over and I looted the man, and I got 2 gold out of it or something like that.
Yeah.
And then second of all, after we realized that we had just ruined everything, Ian literally just had a second old man come out, and he's like, "I'm blind. Have you seen my brother?"
Yeah.
And immediately everybody was like, "Don't shoot him." And that's the only thing I remember about that D&D campaign, because it was 7 or 8 years ago.
So I remember that because that's like, your first real game, and that was so fun and funny. And by the way, this is when. So you get like a set of dice in the starter box, and we all were sharing that one set of dice.
Oh
Where
yeah.
now it's funny because I have like 2 full bags of dice.
I have 5 sets by my, well, no, 4 sets, maybe 5 sets, and an extra D20 by myself. So
So that was the thing that happened, and then I I don't know why. I think Salem was kind of mean to Edmus at first, and like I remember him scaring him a lot, and you ended up having to get a pants stat because you kept
yes,
pooping your
that
pants.
that comes into the whole thing I said earlier. Who is kind of notorious for being a coward. Edmus had good intentions, but he was not the bravest guy. So when we went to a city, I spent as much money as I could on replacement pairs of pants. So anytime something remotely scary would happen or whatever, I would -1 to pants stat, with the
Yeah.
implication that Edmus had gotten so scared that he pooped his pants.
And then he just changed out of them. So
And
that
then,
was
yeah, I mean, like, what are you gonna do? It's You're in the middle of everything. You're not just gonna keep them around and try to wash them. I'm not gonna carry those with me. They got poo in them.
so there was that, and then there was there's parts I remember so vividly. So first off, we had to catch these lemurs. They weren't actual lemur or lemmings, I think they were. Yeah, because it
Lemmings.
what?
Yeah, lemmings was correct,
Yes,
except for some reason they kind of
they blew up
embodied.
into
Well,
diamonds.
First of all, when you killed them, they did blow up. But if you caught one, you could peel it like an orange.
Yeah, so that was one thing. I remember the quest was whatever it was, we needed to get the skin of a lemming, but you couldn't kill it. You had to like learn how to skin it. So we had to go to this house. And the only reason I remember the house is because there was a very specific part where Ian had Jeff roll to go through a door and he got stuck. And Jeff just role play. It was like the first time Jeff did something like really in character and he just went heavy armor.
Heavy armor.
And
He was just too wide to get through the door, and that became his character trait, just heavy armor.
And it was so good. And so we had to like go through this. We ended up having to peel lemmings like oranges, and it was really weird, but it was still what led me down. That that's over 10 years ago. That sent me down a real cycle. Oh boy. Is there anything else you wanted to add, or?
From the first game, that's as many details as I can recall. Based on you saying stuff about it, it kind of sparked a little bit of extra memory with the whole like lemmings and peeling like oranges thing.
Yep.
But other than that, I really don't remember anything else about that campaign.
Yeah, same, but it's still
so long ago. The characters have remained in my heart though, and they've become a meme among our friend group. So I'm okay
I
with
try
that.
to incorporate them into almost every game we play as a joke. They haven't showed up in our current campaign yet, but
I don't think they showed up in season 1 yet, and we're in season 2 of the campaign, and they still haven't showed up. But there's a lot of our current continent and world that we haven't explored yet. So there's plenty of, there's ample opportunities for them to show up at some point as an Easter egg.
yeah. So moving on, do you have a favorite game you played? I know you're playing. I don't want you to call out, favorite DMs or anything like that. But we've played a lot of different. I've thrown a lot of crazy stories and scenarios at you guys. You ran a game which I really enjoyed, but we can go into that later.
Yeah, see, the thing is, so like, I'd say like a good 85% of games that I have played have actually been DM'd by you. And I don't mean to be all rude to you on your own podcast, but my favorite experience isn't one that you've DM'd.
That's fine.
And that's not to say the caliber of your storytelling or anything like that. It's simply because I've had such a good experience with this in the last few months with a group of friends that I hold near and dear that I never thought would actually get into things like D&D, and it's just been such a wholesome experience. So I have another friend, Amanda, and she caught D&D fever about a year ago, and she is a fledgling DM. Over the last 4 or 5 months now, she has been simultaneously running 2 campaigns of a group of my friends and another group of friends of hers, people who I am at least familiar with, but I just don't see very often. And for the other group, she is completely making her own story. For my group, we're just following the Lost Mines of Fandelver, which is a beginner's module for D&D 5e. And even though it's a beginner's module, I've never played through it, and obviously none of the rest of my party has played through it, and it's just been very fun. Other than me, there's only one other person in our 5-man party of players that has ever played D&D before. We've got 3 complete newbies, and it's very fun just playing through almost as the quote unquote big brother of RPGs and stuff like that. I try my best to let people role play it out and suss out the puzzles by themselves if it's something that I think I know. And unfortunately, because we've got 3 newbie D&D players, they don't do a whole lot of the role play. I try to encourage it, but it really is myself and my other friend who has played before who do a lot of majority of the talking with other characters just because we like playing D&D. It's not that I'm an overly assertive person, you know this. I'm a very reserved person, but when I take about 40% of the conversation time, it's like wow.
Yeah.
The rest of these people are really quiet. And it's not because they're reserved personalities, it's just because they're kind of unfamiliar with D&D as of yet. And I can't wait to see a couple months down the line, once they get more comfortable with their characters, how they've evolved through their characters. And just so far, I've had such a great experience with that. and we only started out at level 1. Things were really rough starting out, but we've banded together. We've formed bonds between characters, only certain characters. Other characters we only work with because we have a mutual respect for, because we're all doing this together. There are a couple characters who I fully respect as friends, in character, I'm saying,
Yes.
not as me, because I love all my friends, but there are other characters who I'm just like, yeah, I can tolerate this character being here. And it's just been such a wholesome experience, and I love it. So I would say that is my favorite D&D experience to date, is the campaign that was started about 4 or 5 months ago with a group of my friends who I never thought would play D&D, and it's turned out fantastic.
So follow up to that, how long is this module? Do you know? And do you guys can plan on continuing with these characters after the module? Like, have you talked about that at all, or?
I haven't, but I believe the module is supposed to end when we get to about level 5, if we complete all of the main stuff that people would normally complete. And we are just about to level 3. That's the other thing. Amanda, as the DM, actually is going through with XP leveling up as opposed to group leveling up per chapter and stuff like that. So I think we're going to complete things at level 5, and she has mentioned that she's got ideas for the rest of the world. So I would assume that we're going to continue going, and I really hope we continue going with these characters, because I really like playing as my new character, who is a human female rogue who I named Kiri Ielezon after the 1980s Mr. hit of the same name, Kiri Ielezon. And I was just like, that sounds like a cool name, but it's also like a classic rock reference, and it's such a me thing to do. So
Yeah. Just my 2 cents on modules is I'm so afraid to run them. I have one module I own of the official D&D 5e. It's Princes of the Apocalypse, and the only reason I have it is because it was the only. I wanted to legally own all the source material I could, and it was the only book that had the Ganassi, or Genasi, however you want to pronounce it, race in it. Which, if you don't know, there's a race of people out there that are half human, half elementals. And, there's fire, water, earth, and air. And they're a very cool race, and I just wanted to legally own as much material as I could. So that's why I have it, and I kind of like skimmed through it, and it's just kind of like, it's like if the players look up at the ceiling, they notice there's traps. Otherwise, they can roll to see them or something like that.
exactly. I can confirm, playing through a module, there are certain situations like that where we were adventuring through a cave, and had someone not done a specific action, we probably would have gotten ambushed by a creature.
Yeah, and like I said, I haven't run a module, and not to break off too much, but I got even more afraid of running a module when I was listening to a different thing with my personal inspiration for my DMing nowadays, Brendan Lee Mulligan, and he was talking about his first time DMing, and he was running a module, and the idea was real simple. Was a princess was supposed to get married, and in the module, the bad guy shows up, kidnaps the princess, and the heroes have to go rescue the princess.
Mario.
Yes. However, the in his story, the players were like, they talked to her, and she wasn't super thrilled about the marriage, and they're like, we're gonna kidnap the princess and keep her from forced marriage. And he's like, are you sure you want to do that? Because that completely broke the whole thing, and I don't know how I'd be able to handle that with the book. That's why I've always ran my own things, where I can kind
Right.
of alter everything in the universe on a dime, basically.
If you're running a story that is not inherently yours, it can be kind of difficult to reroute people.
Yeah. And that's the other thing too, is I don't know. I haven't run them, so maybe you can give me some input. But it feels like, because it's written out on the pages, it feels like it's very railroady.
Uh, it can be, but there were several. Maybe it's just because we haven't made a whole heck a lot of progress, simply because three newbie D&D players. A lot of time is spent comprehending what's going on, to where a more seasoned D&D player would be just like, oh yeah, this happened,
Yep.
where you don't have to explain as much to them or whatever, and that's fine. But I don't find it to be too railroady, because I mean, the very first confrontation that we had, we totally could have just ignored. But considering we went on our impulse to follow some clues, we got to a big cave and a confrontation that gave us a lot of information. It wasn't necessary to complete the story, but it's a lot of information that is helpful. Once we got to our first main town, Phandalin, the namesake of the module, we were immediately informed. First of all, we completed our menial delivery task, which was the reason why we went there. And second of all, we were informed of a scourge on the town and what was going on with it. And there's plenty of places in town where you can talk to people and get other quests and other side quests. I know that my character specifically has talked to the lady who maintains the local shrine, and she's like, well, if you have time, you can go up and do this mission for me, and in return, I can give you these healing potions and items and stuff. Because I was really interested in getting healing potions, because we're gonna go and fight things. And she said, well, that's a reward for completing this quest. So we had options to go out and do stuff, but really we chose to just charge right into it. We putzed around in town for about a day, and our cleric, who is the character who my character is mostly just tolerating at this point, was like all gung-ho about going after the scourge on the town. And we were like, all right. So we gathered a little bit of information, and we are well on our way, about halfway through the dungeon, clearing out these bad guys, as far as I can tell. And we're going to have one heck of a fight the next time we meet. So I think we definitely had enough options, even though it was a module. And our group specifically chose to do an extra mission early and then jump into the main mission sooner than most other people might have, even if they missed the early mission.
Okay, that's good. Maybe I'll read the book at some point and it'll change my
Exactly.
mind, but
It might be a little bit harder for me to articulate what's going on here, because I don't actually know the story of the Lost Mines of Phandelver, and if I did, it would defeat the purpose of me playing, so I'm not going to find out.
yeah.
But if you're never planning on playing that, because I don't think you are, considering you're a seasoned player, you don't need to deal with that. It might be a good idea for you to read through a module and just see how much the module and how little the module has to offer. It might give you some good perspective.
Yeah, it might. That goes out to all DMs out there who think like me. I don't know if that's the case, but
Yeah.
you
Unfortunately, I can't confirm or deny.
no, that's
so-
fine. I get that. But yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to talk a bit about my favorite games. There's a lot, and I'm the one who's always going to be on this podcast, so I'm sure I'll get to all of them at some point. So, one of my favorite games I've played was run by Jason right here, and it was a whole zombie theme. He wrote out this like cool little like town that was on a strip of road, and he came up with his own classes and all these fun like character sheets and such. And
I 100% didn't follow any guidelines of any D&D type stuff, because I didn't know what I was doing, so I kind of just made my own system, and it was really primitive, but apparently it made a lasting impact.
it was listen, when you're the forever DM and you actually get to play a game, it was amazing. I got to play, so it'll probably show up multiple times throughout on this podcast, but I'm a huge fan of Bruce Campbell, and we had a joke going between me and Jason that was Bruce Campbell religion, where it's not really a religion, it's a tack on, where the idea is a Bruce Campbell from the future makes a bunch of tiny clones and injects them into the hearts of everybody, so he can basically say, hey, do this, and if somebody says no, he could just kill them with a heart attack. It was a really wacky, it's kind of one of those wacky like flying spaghetti monster type things, just for laughs joke. But he let me play a prophet of cannibalism.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So I got into it. I got a notebook, a little like notebook thing, and I wrote out the Book of Bruce, which was just all of his best quotes from his movies and games and shows and stuff. And I like preached to people about it, and he gave me a Bruce stat that I could roll.
I forget exactly what the Bruce stat did, but it was definitely a stat.
I used it like once or twice, and it was basically to prove that Bruce Campbell is an actual lord and savior to everybody, and
It
not
was a devotion type stat.
yeah. So like, what happened was is I was preaching so much at the beginning that I can't remember what happened, but somebody's like, if you don't talk about Bruce Campbell for 10 minutes in real life, I will give you this item. And I was like, okay. And after those 10 minutes, we're inside a bar, and I like look over to Jason and I say, has it been 10 minutes? And he goes, yeah, do you want to roll to find a soapbox to stand on? And I go, nope. And I jump up on top of a bar table and I just preach my heart out about Bruce Campbell and how he'll save everybody. And when Jason said nobody was interested, I'm like, I'm going to point at somebody and ask Bruce Campbell to prove that he's there. And I rolled, and I believe it was, the system was like you had to roll your number or under or over to get for something to succeed. So like if you did a shoot and you had like an 18, you had to roll and under, I can't remember, was it? Yeah, because it was over. Because I had a 1 and everybody else had a 20, so like it was impossible for them to use the Bruce stat.
Yes.
Except for my sister's character, who was like a nerd, so she had a 19. I remember that. But I had a 1, so it was impossible for me to not use the Bruce stat. And I just pointed to a guy, rolled, and you were like, yeah, he like grabs his chest and falls on the floor, and then he just starts praying to Bruce. And it was...
It didn't kill him.
It didn't kill him. And it was so fun, like, just going back and forth, like, playing an actual game. And Jeff played... I think Jeff was the doctor, right? Who had pills. And it was slowly, like, we slowly built our own story where Jeff's character wasn't actually a doctor. He was an escaped criminal who stole a doctor's jacket. Because he was, like, so mean and vicious to everybody, but it was funny.
Something about his character that... I essentially made character archetypes and then let you flesh out the actual details of your character, but something about his character was that he had a medicine bag and like he could pull out random things from the medicine bag, so that was part of the chaos that ensued with his character, just because it's like, oh, I need help, and he pulls out something completely not helpful and something like really lethal, so then he instead stabs a bad guy with it or something like that. It's like, you're supposed to be a doctor, what are you doing?
And honestly, like, some people think it's upsetting. I think it's amazing how it ended. Essentially, everybody had, like, a super ability they could use. And at this point, we were at, like, the last stretch. We were all on, like, the back of this pickup truck. I think there was a machine gun on the back of it. And we were going to get out of town and move on. And this whole gang just showed up to, like, stop us. And I look to them, and I go... Don't worry, I got this. And I jump off the back of the truck and use my ability, which is I pull out a kazoo and play the Bruce Campbell song by Psycho Stick. And everybody, like, clutches at their hearts and lose half their health. And I just stood there and, like, fought them off. And they're just like, let's go.
Yeah, the rest of the party just abandoned you.
They just full-on abandoned me. They didn't even, like, hesitate. Like, I think my sister's character was like, should we wait for him? And they're like, no, let's go.
Yeah, they all just left. But it was a one shot, but like at the same time, it's just like, wow.
Yeah, it was great. And I think of that fondly.
Well, I'm glad you think of that fondly, and hopefully at some point you can have another fond memory of a campaign DM'd by me, because over the last couple weeks I have thought of a new scenario that I want to DM that I think is kind of unique, and I don't want to tell you anything about it because you're probably going to be a player in it, so I'm sorry. But don't expect it anytime soon, but it's definitely on the back burner right now of my mind, and it has been for like 2 weeks, and I've slowly been building on it. So it'll happen again where you get to be a player, and I'm glad to give you that experience after all of the fun that you've given us.
Yay. So we've kind of dipped into this with, you know, what I just said and things you've said, but do you have like any really amazing D&D stories you want to share?
I mean,
Like specific, like you can go into specifics with characters and such like that if you.
I thought long and hard about this because I didn't want my answer to this to just be like, oh, my first encounter as Edmus with my first encounter in D&D because that was really fun. And I didn't want it to be an encounter from my game where I'm playing as Kiri, my rogue, because it's like, yes, that is my favorite game so far, but I don't know if it has my favorite experience so far. And playing favorites is all just subjective anyways.
Yeah,
Um,
I say favorite, but it could really just be one you like remember fondly.
one that definitely does stand out fondly to me is my current character is a ranger named Henrik Masi, and as our last season of D&D, we've kind of split it up into seasons where we started out with some characters and then some fell off and some rolled over to the next season where it's the same player characters but different characters continuing on in our story in our lovely world that you've created. Season 1, I guess I would say chapter 3, considering we had like an introductory chapter which I don't count, and then chapter 1 of Sun City, chapter 2 of the Talaka tribe, chapter 3 of my character's hometown of Walk. I just really enjoyed that whole chapter, and I mean, I'm biased because it was about my character.
Yeah.
But I love how fleshed out we all made it. My character comes from a small farming town on a river, and they were plagued by or sorry, not by vampires, by werewolves. And I ended up getting to role play with a whole extended family of mine that was still back in Walk. I've got several siblings and a mother. My father's passed on and passed the farm to my older brother, and not all of my siblings are there. Some of my siblings roam around the world like I do, but it was really cool to show up back to a place where I had only previously thought about it in my mind. You, as the DM, I didn't give you too much information about Walk, but even though through all of that, when we came there with my party, I felt like I was actually coming home as Henrik. I was like, this is really cool. We are establishing a new area in this game that my character is familiar with, that I have friendly faces who know me, who I'm going to be able to introduce all of my new adventurer friends to, and we're going to be able to help the people in this town who previously, 2 sessions ago, didn't actually exist. But when we got there, to me, it just felt like they always existed. It felt like this is my character's hometown. This is what I have to do. It was a sense of duty in protecting it, and a sense of family in that my brother came down with an illness, and it connected all in with the werewolves and all that. And I don't have to go into super detail, but I was worried at several points that we wouldn't be able to succeed, and I was very glad that we were able to make preparations for an attack, and we launched a counterattack, and the plan that we had went a bit pear-shaped, and two of us were stranded several hundred feet away from the rest of our party, and we ended up pulling it together. It wasn't easy. There was a lot of combat heavy situation down away from where I was, and I felt a little bit guilty for not being able to be there because I've got a lot of stupid damage abilities. um, but I don't know, it was such a great experience. I think that is my favorite D&D story, as chapter 3s of season 1 of our current campaign, just the city of, or the town of Walk, where I get to go home and bring my friends to band together and protect my hometown.
Yeah, there's two things I really want to kind of build off of that. Is one is a lot of people came from big places or from nowhere at all, and you just wanted to come from a small fishing village. So it's very easy for me to be like, well, I can name everybody here and say what they all do because I don't have to worry. I can say there's, you know, 40 people here, and that's like fine. Unlike Jeff's character, love you, Jeff, but he came from Sun City, and it's a city which has thousands of people living into
It
it.
is probably the biggest city on the continent.
And the thing is, you guys immediately went to Sun City, and then you went to the Talaka tribe. And, while that was part of the story to help, you know, I told you guys this, I kind of railroaded you through season 1 just because we had so many new players to D&D, and I just didn't want, while I would let you do whatever you wanted, I wanted to kind of give you a structure until everybody got comfortable with the game.
The basis of our season 1 had to deal with 5 main chapters centered around one of each of our 5 main characters. So our first chapter dealt with our fighter, Bruce the Bold. We went to his home place, and then we received dreams. The rest of our characters received dreams as like, oh man, something bad is happening at my home. We should go figure that out. So then we decided to go and kind of ping pong in between the rest of the locations. And it was, I think it was a good way. I don't ever recall it being too railroady.
I like to really play this style based off the game Dishonored, where you have levels. There's only so far you can go. There's only so much they have scripted there, but there's still a crap ton where you make your own game and have your own endings and such.
Exactly.
And and building off of the whole thing of you finally showing up to town, that's the other thing too is, you immediately went to Sun City, and then you went to the Talaka tribe, and by the time you got to Walk, you've already gone on these harrowing adventures and done some incredible deeds and such, and, lost and all this other stuff. So by the time you got home, it was already like, yeah, it's good to be home. No offense to Bruce the Bull, because I still loved the whole Sun City arc. You guys, that was so fun. You guys running around the city, solving mysteries and learning all the characters and such. But, he went straight home. Like, Bruce didn't have time to be like, oh, look at all these amazing things I did, Dad. He proved himself to his dad in that story.
Oh, 100%. But it was also very in character, if you couldn't tell from the name Bruce the Bold, to kind of take charge and be like, there's something wrong with my home. We're going there first. So we were all just like, okay.
Yeah.
And it seemed logical. It was a big city. It was a metropolitan area. We were like, okay, we could probably, solve an issue here. We might be able to get better transportation to minimize our travel time to other locations. We might be able to get better provisions and better weapons and armor there. At least that was my thought, because I'm a logical person. It's like, yeah, it makes sense to go to a city first.
Logic in my D&D game? Get out of here. That's really good to hear. I'm glad I can do that. I don't know how many DMs out there think like this, but it's always like, man, I hope they're enjoying themselves. I just really hope they are. Are they not? Would they tell me if they weren't? I just don't know. And it's like that thought in my head, and it's kind of like, while I said it last night to one of our newest players. I was like, he's melded into our group so well, but he wasn't friends with all of us before this, and he keeps showing up. I'm like, that means you actually like what I'm doing, and that's good.
I assume, being a regular DM, you're probably caught with a lot of imposter syndrome almost, which is a horrible thing, but it's understandable, because a lot of the times people don't, people will enjoy the situation, but based on human nature, people will dwell on negatives more than positives. If you go to Wendy's 10 times and you've got 9 times that they gave you your food correctly and 1 time where they messed up your sauce and they gave you sweet and sour instead of barbecue, you're only going to remember that 1 time where it was incorrect.
Do you have something to share? You sound hurt. Who hurt you? Was it Wendy's?
No, actually, no. Wendy's is really, really good to me, actually. I'll tell you what, though. Burger King one time, I ordered 2 bacon cheeseburgers, and I ended up with 2 burgerless bacon cheeses. They actually forgot the burger patty. I went back in. It was lunch rush hour, and I went back in. I went through the drive-through originally. I went back in, and I'm like, hey, I think you missed the burger on these. And they're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. They fixed it immediately. So technically that was a problem story, but I still find that endearing. But the point is, people tend to remember the bad instead of the good, but that doesn't prevent the good from happening, and it shouldn't make it any less important that it did happen.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
And this is the part where I say, "We all secretly hate him." That's what I did last night too when
Yeah.
he was talking about this. I just like obnoxiously loudly whispered with like my hand across, like, "We all secretly." Big jokes, big jokes.
So I'm going to share one more quick story, and then we can start, like, wrapping things up here. One of my favorite moments, and also my least favorite moments, because it keeps biting me in the ass. So I came up with this idea for a game with my friends called The Tower. And it was essentially, everybody was like themselves, but like they all had different abilities and such, and they had to descend this tower to like get out. They couldn't see the bottom from the windows, and it was a lot of goofy jokes and stuff, and I think a semi-decent story at the end. And there's a lot of hilarious moments that happened. Now that I'm thinking about it, there's two moments that happened. One is I gave Jason a shotgun, and at one point he got it signed by Morgan Freeman.
And then sawed off by Bruce Campbell.
Yeah, and it's so he said now it just says Gin Freeman, and
that has lasted so long with me that I think that is still my Twitter banner and my YouTube banner because I've never changed them.
Yeah,
It's
that's why it's an important thing.
My name with the shotgun.
The other moment that, and you're instantly gonna know where I'm going to with this one. I was asked how big a room was. And
yes.
Recently, and I will tell you where this came from. I recently heard it on a Yog pod at the time, and it was used to describe how big the room was, and I was like, oh, you can swing a cat in this room. And nobody else has ever heard that expression, and now we measure rooms by how many cats you can swing in it.
How dare you? I thought you were a genius. You plagiarized. But it definitely has become quite a meme between our D&D group of how big is this area. Oh, you could swing 3 cats in this room. It's like, what the heck? That's so horrible.
And I mean, when you think about the analogy, it's because if you swing a cat, they like really stretch out. I mean,
yeah, no,
but
I get you.
You know, that's as far as we're gonna go with that story. But that's just something that's really important and keeps coming up. So this last part of the podcast will always be answering questions, and I would very much like to answer fan questions, and I will tell you where you can send those to me in a moment. But because this is the first episode and we don't have questions, I just wanted to ask Jason, do you have any questions for me, like, you know, about D&D in general or anything like that? Like, not to put the not to put the spotlight on myself here for a moment, but that's kind of what I figured that'd be a good way to fill in this section, is to get a question from my interviewee.
I think I've got a pretty solid grasp on the basics of D&D, and even a little bit past the basics of D&D at this point. I don't think there's anything specific that I would have to ask you about that I couldn't like ask Google about, specifically because of like mechanics and wise. What I would want to ask you about is the imagination side of D&D, but I don't have any specific questions yet because I haven't decided all of the details of my own campaign that I'm making. So unfortunately right now I don't have a question for you, but I definitely will be asking you questions as I'm making my own campaign.
That's fine. I just figured I'd ask because I just wanted to make sure the section is known that this is where questions will be. So, if you want to reach me, you can reach me at thetabletopteampodcast@gmail.com. It's a mouthful, but so many emails are taken out there, you gotta just start extending them. But it'll be written down in whatever description you find this podcast in. You can hit me up on Twitter. I'm at DM Joe Thunder. There's a YouTube channel. I believe that's also the Tabletop Team Podcast. iTunes and Apple reviews would be great just to help get this going. I'd really would like to. It doesn't have to be, you know, world famous big, but if a couple people listen to it every time I put it out, that'd be great. As for scheduling wise, I'm looking at bi-weekly podcasts, and if I ever record a game, like if I'm playing online and I record it and it sounds good and everybody playing is okay with it, I'll probably throw it up in an audio format on the weeks off if that happens, but no promises. Jason, do you have anything you want to plug?
Sure. You know what? I have a YouTube channel that I've been neglecting since 2014. No, I post a couple of things. I've been trying to get better at it. I play video games, most recently stuff in like Counter-Strike and Sea of Thieves. Just simple, fun, edited things with me and my friends. That is just youtube.com/SoandJ. If you don't want to commit to that, you can commit to my Twitter, where I will also post updates on my YouTube channel, but I also post more often on Twitter. That is twitter.com/SirSoenjay. That is SIRSOENJAY.
All right. Thank you for listening. Jason, thank you for being my first guest on here. I hope to have you.
I am honored.
I hope to have you on again. No big spoilers, but I'm gonna try and get everyone I've played with on here at least once. I think that would be kind of fun just to pick everybody's brains, but we'll see what happens. And welcome to the tabletop team.